there's a tremendous formal beauty to language as Chomsky and how he analyzed it, and I think some of it might be elegant description of historical processes, but I think some of it also is a description of psychological processes, and I think the empirical question is what is really a description of history and what's really a description of psychology. Mm-hmm. Let me mention one other sort of connection, since it is, I think, it's become increasingly of interest, I guess, to me as I've kind of gone full circle to the really exciting cosmic questions that were raised in this article when I was a freshman. I often get asked, do you also agree with Chomsky's politics? And also the corresponding question is, what's the connection between Noam's theory of language and his theory and his political orientation, since both of them are so striking, are so radical by the standards of I guess, the larger intellectual context. In my case, I was influenced by Chomsky's argument in a book not cited very much, but since it came out when I was an undergraduate, it had a big effect on me, called Reflections on Language, which I think is one of Chomsky's most interesting books, because it is the book that lays out the connections between his theory of language, his theory of human nature, and his theory of politics. And I think it's the theory of human nature that links the language ideas and the political ideas. Again, this is a major argument in the blank slate, is that a lot of people's reaction to theories of psychology are because they seem to embody pictures of human nature that have political consequences that people often are uncomfortable with or embrace. In the case of Chomsky's, the link between his politics and his language, he's properly says that these are logically independent. One should not be judged in terms of the other. One can be right, the other can be wrong, but that there is a discernible thread. And the discernible thread for Chomsky is that his view of his politics are those of, he describes himself as a libertarian socialist. For many people that's an oxymoron, but also an anarcho-syndicalist.
Yes, anarcho-syndicalist.
That is a kind of a left-wing anarchist as opposed to a kind of right-wing Ayn Rand capitalist anarchist. And the idea is that people have a spontaneous tendency to cooperate, to produce for the sheer sake of it. We're just creative, productive organisms that have an autonomous need to create, to express our thoughts, to create works of art, works of science, without regard for the reward or the consequences. And that the reason that the only way, first of all, the only way you can be an anarchist is if you believe that people are naturally good, as opposed to, say, being a Hobbesian and believing that people without a Leviathan to control them will be at each other's throats. So you have to have a somewhat romantic view of human nature. And Chomsky does. He traces his ideas, some of his ideas, back to Rousseau and the doctrine of the noble savage. And if you are not a capitalist, if you believe that people don't have to be motivated by wages or profits, you have to have a conception of the human that we have an endogenous, spontaneous need to create for the sake of it. And in fact, the early Marx, who Chomsky also cites favorably, had this as part of his theory of alienation, that there's a natural human tendency to produce and cooperate, and that social institutions of capitalism kind of suppress that, and also suppress the natural human tendency to affiliate, to cooperate, to form harmonious communities. So I think that's the deepest root of Chomsky's belief system. On the one hand, it leads to a anarcho-syndicalist politics. On the other hand, it leads to a conception of language that emphasizes productivity, creativity, the finite algorithm that can generate an infinite number of products. The third thing is it also leads to a view of the evolution of language that would de-emphasize the utility of language as a system of communication, but rather say that language is not for communication, communication being something where you expect some effect and you do it in order to get some effect on your back from the person with whom you've shared information, but rather it's just an endogenous system for externalizing or expressing thought. And language not being useful, simply being an urge to create or express, therefore can't be explained in terms of its beneficial consequences, which of course is the essence of Darwinian natural selection. Things are selected because they're useful. They get you things. You tell someone else where the berries are, they tell you where the fish are. Both of you are less likely to starve. You have more babies. Those linguistic abilities are passed on. That's the opposite of Chomsky's view, where language has nothing to do with finding out where the berries are. It's just an urge to create. And I have to say that that's a view which is, I think, fascinating and in some ways beautiful, but it's very different from my view. Being a more rooting my own nativism in evolutionary biology, I'm more impressed by the Darwinian arguments and evidence about where innate things come from. And that makes it very hard to think of humans as, first of all, developing any complex system outside the evolutionary process, but also leads to a more Hobbesian view of human nature, that I'm not an anarchist. I think liberal democracy is a very good thing, partly for reasons that Hobbes pointed out, namely that in a state of anarchy, I think the empirical evidence suggests that anarchy in the dictionary sense of no government leads to anarchy in the vernacular sense of violent chaos. And so politically, I certainly part company from Chomsky in not being a radical or an anarchist, but being a moderate and a big fan of liberal democracy. And it's because I think the view of human nature that impresses me is one that emphasizes that we, although we do have some tendency to cooperate, there's also a dark side to human nature. And that's the fundamental split.